Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Ghost Education 101. Philip, those videos keep getting weirder and weirder.
I know. I just couldn't help myself.
I wish I could do half the work you do on some of the video editing.
It's fun. Sometimes I get bored and I just want to do something crazy. And I thought, let's make a new Ghost Ed intro. So there you have it, folks.
Yep. And so for those of you that are listening to us on the radio station on Monday nights, if you want to see that video or our intro, make sure you go to our Facebook page at Ghost Education 101 because I keep drawing a blank on this one. I'm so sorry. It's WDJY at 99.1. So in case you guys are listening and wondering what are they talking about, check out our Facebook page and you will see that. So today's going to be a great show. We have Ron and Tony from the Staticom Project. I'm interested in hearing more information about that.
We're going to talk to the spirits directly.
Exactly. So we will get into that in just 1 minute. But real quick, Philip, how have you been? And do you have anything that you've been working on? I hear there's some activity happening behind the scenes over by you.
Gracious. Well, after having a giant tree fall in my backyard from the neighbor's house that wrecked my backyard, dealing with that. But it's okay. It's all good. There's just a lot of sun back there now. Yeah, it's getting busy. We have an investigation Saturday night, a private home investigation that has some apparent poltergeist activity. So that's going to be fun. And they have a lot of shadow people that they're seeing in the house. So very excited about that. And then on the 7th, the 7th, we have, I can't give any details because we had to sign a confidentiality statement, but it's a very big historic building in downtown Atlanta, and we're going to be the first ones to investigate it, and we're very excited about it, but they don't want anything out to the public. So yeah, we went Saturday and spent about almost 3 hours doing pre-work planning, figuring out where cameras go, how we're going to run cables. We've got tons of new 300-foot cables for the cameras, and we took baseline readings that Saturday. So this on the 7th, we don't have to worry about it because it took like over 2 hours to do baseline readings. So so that's what we've got going on.
Yeah, we had a big location like that we had in Vegas that was all had to be confidential, but you know, we could reveal things as long as it didn't reveal the location.
Well, if we get like a full apparition or something, you know, I'm going to have to barter with them to like, okay,
please let me share this.
Please.
Exactly. And then on my end, Monday, my newest book comes out. Ghosts and Legends of Florida Pirates. Looking forward to that one. That one is actually pre-selling very well.
Excellent.
And for anyone in the South Central Florida area of Florida, it is in Winter Haven. The last weekend of October, they're having a Heritage Festival, and they've asked me to come out and actually do a book signing.
Oh, that's great.
With one of the bookstores for that one. So that is going to be a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun writing that book, and I still have your 2 copies I have to send you because the roadside attraction you rode the forward to, and I used your lighthouse photos again for the pirate book.
Oh, okay. Great. Just whenever you can get them to me. I know what busy's like.
So anyway, before our guests behind the scenes fall asleep on us, because there are questions already starting to roll in, so I want to make sure I bring them on. But welcome, Tony and Ron. How have you guys been?
Good.
Doing well. Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you very much.
Good friends of the show.
Exactly.
They've been with us a long time. We appreciate that.
Yep. Yeah, I had Ron on my other show a while back, and holy cow, that was a really fun show. We had a blast doing that one.
It was. It was.
Yeah. So real quick, before we dive too deep into what you guys are working on, can you take a moment to not only introduce yourselves, but also kind of maybe introduce the Staticom Project for people who might not know what that is?
Okay, well, I mean, I'll start with sort of my background. I've been involved in the paranormal field for about 14 and a half years. Got unbelievably interested when my wife demanded I take her on a paranormal investigation back in 2010, Valentine's Day weekend it was. I didn't believe any of that. I thought she was watching all the TV shows. She's like, you gotta come see this. You'll love it. 3 minutes into it, I'm like, nah, this is not real. This is entertainment value only, and I just walked away. So then she kind of trapped me on Valentine's Day. She said, I want to do something different. I want to go ghost hunting, and I had two choices. I could take her or have her mad at me until next Valentine's Day. Didn't want that, so I took her. Played along. She had fun. That was all I really cared about. But when she got the stuff home, started going through it. Things in the pictures that weren't there when we took them. The EVPs caught my attention like crazy because we were getting intelligent responses to question asked when her and I were the only ones there. So I tried to debunk it for about a month, got so frustrated because I couldn't. And then we started going back. I think we investigated that place like over 50 times. And then 14 and a half years later, we're still here. But from EVP, because vocals to me are the strongest evidence. It doesn't matter what other piece of equipment you have, except for maybe a full body apparition on video. But otherwise, you have a noise sounding off or a blinking light, or to me, that doesn't tell me a lot. From a vocal response, I can tell if it's male or female, adult or child. I can tell their emotional state. Are they happy? Are they angry? Are they upset? I can tell if they're speaking a different language, if they're speaking English. I can tell if there's a territorial dialect or accent within their speech. And I can get all that information each and every time before I even get the response that they gave. So from there, we went into ITC. We built spirit boxes for 12 and a half years until Ron showed us a little device called direct radio voice. And then we basically begged them and said, hey, can we become part of this project and let's see what we can do with it. And that kind of leads us up to where we are today with Staticom.
Yeah, blame it on the wife. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
That's a great story. That's my favorite. I wish that was my story. So for me, I started about just under that, maybe 12 and a half years or so ago when I lived in Southern California. I'm in New Jersey now, which is where I'm originally from. And I had an early fascination with EVP also. Just the idea that a voice that was not physically present was somehow able to respond, communicate, however you call it, was fascinating to me. Especially when people were using the live listening and they would hear the EVPs that weren't detectable without that, but were some of them with the headphones. Wow, that's fascinating. But what pushed me over the edge beyond that was Glen Tavern Inn, Santa Paula. There was 30 people on the third floor. They're doing a spirit box session. Everybody introduces themselves. And the main person for that event that night was Chad Lindbergh from Fast and Furious. He did that show with John L. Tenney. And he was the last one, and he introduces himself, and he goes, hi, my name's Chad. 20, 30, not even seconds, 20-something seconds, a voice comes out of the SB7 and goes, I know Chad. And I was like, whoa, what is that thing he's doing? And how do we get on that racket? Where is it? And it was a spirit box. And I was fascinated that this whole real-time thing was even a thing. I was brand new. I had no idea. I had heard about recording voices, but this like dialogue, really? So I got hooked, and I went that route. Where I part on that path from Tony is Tony's very handy. He built a car recently. He can build a sandwich. He can build a spirit box. He built ghost boxes for 12, 13 years that were fantastic. Never sold one, which is not a knock against those who sell them. It's a good industry. But it speaks to his integrity and his genuineness in being a researcher. So that was one of the reasons why we were so excited that they wanted to partner with us. So I don't have that ability to build those, and I wanted to contribute because ITC was fascinating to me. And I knew that soldering was not my thing. If I was doing that regularly, I'd be high-fiving you with fewer fingers. Mm-hmm. So I don't. I came across in my endeavors to learn and read, and Dr. Annabelle Cardoso's work, who I know Philip is familiar with.
Yes.
And then I saw everybody who came before her, all the pioneers who actually pioneered vocal phenomena, not the TV pioneers, to take nothing away from them, but that's not what I'm talking about. And she sat with all those people. She knew Bocce, Ernst and Kowski, who came up with the term ITC. She knew the people from the skull experiment, the Foys. So Friedrich Jurgensen, Rodave. And so she kind of mentored me into this stuff. She endorsed my first book a couple of years ago. And to this day, Tony and I still maintain communication with her. And that showed me an avenue that I could participate in. And when I saw what they were doing, more astounding to me than the communication that Bocce was getting with an old vacuum tube radio on a vacant AM channel, more astounding to me was that nobody was doing it. Because in America, if it's not on TV, it doesn't exist. And that blew my mind. When I get the Spirit Box thing, and this probably is unpopular in ITC circles as an opinion, but I don't think the Franks box, as the inception of this movement, I don't think it was a progression of ITC. I think it was a derivation. I think it was an offshoot, maybe even a derailment, because of the efficacy of what you saw with direct radio voice far outshined what I'd ever seen a ghost box do. And that's why I couldn't believe nobody was doing it. So Lourdes and I took up that mantle around 2019. Everything, heterodyning frequencies, tone generators, UHF mixed with long wave. We tried everything. And eventually we got to the point where we were getting vocals, and then the software component was introduced to us by a gentleman named Keith Clark. We took that modality and ran with it in what would be a counterintuitive direction if you were trying to, let's say, I don't know, produce Beyonce's next hit. And she's not returning my calls, so we're not doing that.
Let me talk to her.
Yeah, go. So we came on to something that seemed to answer some of the fundamental questions that even early ITC people had. A lot of them reported losing vocals for a month, a couple months, maybe a year. And I think, and we'll get into this, how we think this works as far as resonance goes, I think that they may not have actually lost them, but the amount of resonance available to make them detectable without what we do now with the software component may have been the difference between thinking there was nothing happening and something happening that you didn't know. Tantamount to, as right now, we're all sitting somewhere where radio stations are flying past our heads, but our sense perceptions don't pick them up. Something modulates that, boom, now we're tuned in. And I think that's what our process does. And then we were, to my knowledge, the first in ITC to ever take the flow of live white noise in real time and slow it down, which has made tremendous difference in what we do. And then flash forward, direct radio voice had to get a name change because through experiments that Tony had done and then an experiment that Lourdes and I had done here, we realized that the vocals are not coming in through RF signal, through carrier wave. It's completely a resonance-based thing with the white noise. So we couldn't call it direct radio voice without a radio, hence the name that Tony was able to acquire for us, Staticom.
Fascinating. Now, Ron, you mentioned a bunch of names that a lot of our viewers may not know because, you know, like most paranormal people think of ITC and ghost boxes as what they see in the scary television shows. Yep. You know, that's not how it came about and what it was for originally. You know, like Marcello Bocce, everybody that's watching, look up his documentary on YouTube. It is fascinating. Mm-hmm. Konstantin Raudove,
Friedrich Jurgensen, the father of direct radio voice.
Look these people up and you'll see what it was really about, not what you see on the shows with the ghost boxes and saying demon and junk like that. That's not what ITC was for. So, you know, do a little homework, and I think you'll really, really be glad you did.
Yeah. Yeah, we have to have a familiarity and reverence for those who came before us, for those whose shoulders we stand upon when being seen by the masses now. We need to have that to know what's been done, what's been tried, what we can learn from what they did, and then directions we can take it ourselves. And I think that's another thing that Tony and Sri Rathman shared with us. He's a guy, and he won't tell you this because he's very humble. He built incredible ghost boxes for 12, 13 years, but since he's been doing direct radio voice now / Staticom, he hasn't touched one in about 3 years. That's very telling to me.
And a lot of that's due to, you know, any response you get through a spirit box has a brevity to it. And that brevity, we believe, is from the miscalculation in the philosophy of what's happening with a spirit box. So the theory behind a spirit box is that they're going to take those fragments of radio, because spirit box scans up and down the dial, and manipulate those and move them and create their own sentences from them, which from a physics perspective, I mean, that would have to happen at the speed of light, and each sound would have to be available to form the words they're looking to form. So, but what we noticed was, like, through the tests, I mean, after we started getting some information, I did a live test with a sleep machine, which had a white noise pre-recorded looping sound on it. Did it work though? Yes, it did. I got an answer. The problem was, though, not only did I get the answer, it encoded that response onto the chip in the sleep machine. So now if you play the sleep machine back, that answer repeats every 3 seconds. But from that information, I went out, I recorded running water, fans, air conditioners. I taped cars or mics to my car when I drove around town to create white noise to see if I could pull voices from it. And believe it or not, I could. The problem is that there's no consistency in the level of the white noise. If another car passed me, that white noise sound would increase. And so that's when we said, let's try a white noise generator, because that has a spectral frequency of 1, meaning every sound from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, all equal. You don't, otherwise you'd hear a sound over the others, but you don't. You just hear that whooshing sound. And that solved the problem. And we were able then to continue to have our two-way communications with clarity, without having the low-hanging fruit of a radio being involved in the process.
What about people, a lot of times they'll say they hear voices in their house and things. And I've always thought that, if your refrigerator has a constant hum, that's a frequency and a vibration maybe that they can manipulate, or other things in your house. If you've got water dripping, like you said, I mean, I think they can sometimes take that opportunity to try to speak through.
Without a doubt. I mean, there's a phenomenon called direct voice, where you've got investigators searching a location, and everyone actually hears another voice coming out of nowhere that no one in the group said.
Yeah.
That phenomena works the same way we believe Staticom functions, but it's using white noise in the environment, which does exist.
Yeah.
And that process then could be replicated the exact same way we do it with Staticom, but it does back up that theory and that process.
Yeah, you'll see me a lot throughout a lot of the things we discuss, and when we lecture also. I'll parse words, and I'll be very specific with the ones I choose. One of the ones I've kind of abandoned in recent years is manipulate, because there's an implication of volition involved to say that something's being manipulated. And I think sometimes it's just perhaps organically timed. And if we believe that we're immersed in consciousness and everything is within consciousness, which we'll get to, then the resonance brings forth something just like the radio stations I mentioned before, through modulating the experience so we can detect it. It doesn't necessarily, it could in instances, but it does not necessarily on a fundamental level imply that it's volitional, that they're manipulating the white noise. I think it's provided environmentally, and it can have that effect. There are also instances too sometimes where you could actually have a mechanical sound wave that's propagating from just far enough that it kind of trails off. And sometimes that environmental white noise could work almost like a repeater and give you a hint of what it is. So that's something to be mindful of. However, and Tony will talk about this a lot, we govern what we think is authentic as far as what we call evidence or data based on timing and relevance in large part. And so something trailing off from a distance, getting a repeater benefit from white noise, is not going to answer my question when I say, what am I holding in my hands, and say the word. That's not going to happen.
I'm just curious, Ron, what was your point about repeater? Are you talking an echo? What were you referring to there?
It will bolster the if there's a sound wave that's just barely kind of reaching, if you're on the outskirts of where eventually the cohesiveness of the air thins it out.
Right.
You could get a little bit of an amplitude from a distant sound within your environment from white noise that you're able to detect.
True.
But it would more likely be something, let's say, like musical, or if it was talk, but it would not be interactive. And it certainly wouldn't be engaging at the level of what we're presenting. I'm just pointing a finger towards another possibility of where white noise can have an effect environmentally, just to kind of cover it all.
True. But I mean, white noise is used to detect signals undetectable to human perceptions. It's used in medical devices. It's used in scientific equipment. It's used in all sorts of things. So that principle, to apply it to Staticom, seemed to work quite well. And then because we believe it elevates the voice, then we can cut the broadband white noise out from underneath it, leaving only the voice that's left to be heard. But to your point, Philip, about certain sounds and people turning around and saying, you know, when I turn the fan on or when the air conditioner is running, I hear voices. And today, the medical community will say, okay, you're suffering from musical ear syndrome or schizophrenia. But based on how we know Staticom works, and the fact that white noise is what allows them to bounce their whatever hertz they're speaking off on top of that, which elevates it, could voices, and the fact that I pulled them from running water, wind, could voices be perpetuated from white noise-like sounds? Yeah, I believe they very well could.
I want to ask you a question. You know, the average paranormal investigator, EVP is one that's recorded that we don't hear. Do you use the term EVP for responses from your devices, or do you what term do you use? Just response, or?
Well, I mean, originally when voices first appeared, everything was EVP.
EVP, yeah, exactly.
That was in the 50s, and that happened till about 1970, when a physicist named Ernst Sinkowski said, "I want to come up with a different term," and he came up with ITC, or instrumental transcommunication. Now, technically, when using a device to promote two-way communication, I mean, technically, it's still electronic voice phenomena because you're still using a third-party electronic device to capture it. But I think there is some distinction between EVP and ITC, where ITC gives the impact that it's meant to be two-way, where EVP is record and review, meaning by the time you listen to it, you're at home and that conversation is over.
Yeah, that's what, you know, when I do like a Paranormal 101 presentation, I explain EVP is recorded below the human hearing hertz. We cannot hear it with our own ears. And then I explain about ITC. It is audible through the devices. So I was just wondering if you lumped everything into EVP, because some people do, and it's very confusing.
Yeah,
I
don't do that, just because I think that EVP gets confused with both the evidence that you capture when doing the method and the method itself.
Right.
And then I think that will invoke confusion. So that's why I don't call the evidence stuff or what we record EVP.
I agree.
All right. I just wanted to clarify in case, you know,
it's not wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then to bounce off of that real quick, kind of like how EVPs have different classifications, whether it's clear, you understand it, or it's just kind of the voice is there, but you don't know what it's saying. Does your project have anything similar along that lines of how you classify the different types of communications you get?
Not really, because the majority of stuff that comes through is audible to the point where, not all of it, I mean, don't get me wrong, there is a percentage of stuff that comes through that you're not 100% sure what they said. You can get close, but usually the responses to the questions asked are in the range where they don't need classification. It's audio that you can clearly hear.
Okay.
Yeah, I also think that sometimes, I think the classification for EVP was done with well intentions.
Yeah,
but it's a hot mess as far as any consistency with regards to what's class A, B, C, etc. So could we do that? Yeah, but to me, it would be a subjective free for all. I don't think anybody would follow it necessarily, and because of the difference in our methodology, it would not really be applicable to anybody but us. I think the idea of a grading system was meant to have some kind of coherency amongst the community. However, and as we know, an objective truth is a red herring. There is no such thing. Even with evidence, you get it from instrumentation. Regardless, everything that you interpret is subjective. You're not going to find that kind of unison in evidence review. You're going to find people who think a class C is A. You're going to think people who think a class A is not good enough and throw it out.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, are the naysayers? There's one in particular whose name I will not mention. Just rips apart everybody's everything. Are you getting people saying, "Oh, pareidolia"? We all get that all the time, even when it's, Google Translate could close caption what the EVP says when it's that clear.
Right.
I mean, there's just
I'll let Ron. When this,
Tony and I know each other so well. Yes, I have several problems with the pareidolia thing. I'll start with the fact that yes, it happens. It's undeniable that this happens. However, it gets thrown around like WebMD throws around headache. It's a symptom of everything.
Yeah.
It's way too liberally used, for one. I know in instances, I believe it was with ghost boxes, they had done blind and double blind studies, and they said that it was not a reliable source of spirit communication, or to be called that, because there was like 75% of people heard different words. Another amount of people heard the same word, a small percentage. Some people didn't hear anything. And so the problem with that is that there's some strange notion that if and Lourdes says this, and she's a state licensed court reporter, so I will take the court reporter's testimony over the audio engineer who knows how sound behaves and how to produce it anytime, because she's listening to linguistics and different cadences, speeds, people talking over each other for a living. And she'll say, just because I hear trip, but the word was rip, doesn't mean that a word wasn't spoken. Is our hearing fallible? Do sounds and words rhyme and have similarities? Yes. But it does not mean that 75% of this double-blind study, people heard different words. It doesn't mean they didn't hear words. That's the first thing. The second thing is that if you look at the level of dismissal the paranormal audio evidence gets under the umbrella, under the banner of pareidolia, for it to be that rampant, there would have to be data suggesting where this pareidolia happens to people in daily life, like real significant instances. Where's that data? Where's the guy who walks into his supervisor's office and they go, "You're fired," and he goes, "What? A raise? Fantastic. I'm sorry, pareidolia, my prescription ran out." Where's that happening? You can't say that this fallibility in hearing and hearing what you want to hear is predatory only to the paranormal. That's absurd. It's narrow-minded, and the fact that the field accepts it sometimes, to me, is bizarre. You have to substantiate that. It can't just happen. I can't have perfect hearing or near perfect hearing day to day and get through life, but when I'm listening to spooky stuff, all of a sudden, I don't know what I'm talking about, and I'm hearing what I want to hear. No, you can't say that. So that's my problem. I think it's a real thing, but I think it just gets swiped across the landscape just willy-nilly with no real substance behind the usage of it.
And critical thinking too, and being having integrity in your work. You're going to, if it's not clear, you're throwing it out like we do. I mean, there's some people that just like, "Oh my God, it said demon," they had nothing like demon, but that's what they hear because that's what they want to hear.
Yeah, I mean it occurs, but Ron's absolutely right. It's not a day-to-day factor where you subjectively come up against it 4 or 5 times a day. And there are a lot of clips out there on YouTube and other things where you can't hear anything, and they're putting words to it. So the effect and the outcome of that sensibility to say, well, you might be hearing what you think you're hearing when it's actually not there, Ron's right, that does occur, but it's not to the level, at least with Staticom, it's not to that level because there's clarity to this voice, but it's not as prevalent. And the fact, like Ron said, that it's amplified 10 times when it comes to pulling EVPs or ITC voices than in regular life.
Yep.
So we did have a couple quick questions. Linda asked earlier in the show, are we getting closer to a spirit phone?
Rathman, what do you think, Rathman?
Well, I mean, I'm going to say this as honestly and humbly as I can, but I have to say, direct radio voice was not far from it. In fact, it was probably the closest it's ever been. Staticom, we made some really nice improvements as far as taking away some of the skepticism of the radio, getting straight radio waves. The clarity we've now obtained from the voice structure where people aren't guessing what was said. You have a group of people that all go, oh my God, they just said, and everyone's like, yeah, I heard it. So from that perspective, I have to say that we're probably as close to that theoretical Thomas Edison hopeful invention as there's probably ever been. But are we there 100%? No, there's still additional research, there's still additional work, and that's going to go on for a while. But the two-way communication that even in the last couple of weeks that we've been with Ron and Lourdes running double sets and giving passwords to spirits to when we switched machines that they'd have to say to come to the next one, we're getting closer, if not really close.
Yeah, Linda, Dr. Schwartz is the one in charge at Ron Institute doing the soul phone.
Yes.
And I just went to a Zoom lecture with one of his colleagues that's working on it, and they're about to make some announcements on the progress. But Ron, I sent you the link to the video. I don't know if you had time to watch it because you were gone, but I can get it and we can post it on the Ghost Ed page, and you can watch it and see what the latest updates on the progress and the is really interesting. Their work with mediums and the phone, so they're validating who they're speaking to. I mean, there's a lot more going into it than just picking up the phone and calling the spirit world. They're locating individuals. So
they didn't yet have any auditory data yet, right? From what I understood, it was yes, no, and they were working on a keyboard to allow texting.
Yeah, there's a lot he said and a lot he didn't say. So
right. We've been following the process a little bit too from afar. We've actually reached out to see if there was any possibilities of maybe, unity in this field. Imagine that, unity. We were trying. To no avail. We'd not heard back though. Two of the representatives from their board, one of their boards, actually did show up to a digital seance initiative event that Tony did out in Arizona a while back. So we at the very least, I guess, got their attention on some level. We hope they succeed. We wish them well. I think that there's a clear mission statement if you go to the website that seems to want to distance itself from ITC, which appears to me to be very much rooted in what had happened in Ghostbox and like the studies I mentioned. So, stuff happened before the ghost boxes and stuff's happening now that's derived from that, and it's difficult to ignore. And the efficacy of method is far beyond, we think, the potential. So at some point we'd hope maybe that they would turn and take a look. But again, everybody's got their passions and their endeavors, and I hope they strike gold with what they're doing. We've gone to great lengths. I wanted to mention something that Tony tagged on, which is important. We looked at what we're doing, and we know what some of the cynicisms are. And we said, what are the key things that we can try to address or at least have an awareness of, so we're not fooling ourselves or putting something out foolishly and not knowing what's going on? So the first one was radio bleed through. ITC gets hit with radio bleed through. Tony mentioned that. We've removed the radio. We realized it's resonance. We don't need the RF signal or the carrier wave. So now there's the first big one off the plate. The only other one we've heard that had validity to it and we wanted to address was that we're hearing what we think are words, but they're actually warbles and artifacts of sound because white noise is random, and we can always discern patterns in randomness. So I said, all right, let's unpack this and see see if we can address it. So first of all, randomness. Random in the paranormal and certainly in the scientific community is an empty drawer. It's what we say when at the time we cannot calculate or model or do some kind of a calculation to affect what's going on or to figure out what's going on. White noise is not fundamentally random. There's charged ion particles, quantum fields, electromagnetic fields, deterministic speech we feel because it has the characteristics of consonants, vowels, diphthongs, pauses, cadence. So it's not fundamentally random. What the white noise is it's computationally irreducible. At the moment, it's not plausible or possible to calculate all those factors. Similarly, if you look at the coin toss at the Super Bowl, right? You go, it's random, heads or tails. It's not random. You have trajectory, wind speed, gravitational forces, angular momentum is a variety of things, but they don't have a team of scientists on the 50-yard line trying to figure it out. They just toss it and go, it's random. So we looked at that, and then we also thought, well, to discern patterns in what you consider randomness is not a statement of debunkery. That's an appeal to our intellect. That's how we communicate. We identify consonants, vowels, diphthongs, syntax within
language,
messaging, right, that we're familiar with. So it's not a statement of debunkery to say that we're identifying patterns in randomness. We don't ever hear the cat go meow, meow, meow and go up. He wants to get in the car and buy treats, right? So I think there's something to that beyond what the cynicism says. And again, as Tony pointed out so nicely, the clarity of the words are oftentimes as if somebody in the room was saying it. And it's coming out of somebody who's not present in the room. If I played a recording of some of these words for some people and said it was a person, they would believe it.
Right.
Well, it is a person, just through a different means. But there's two aspects to this whole thing, and the one is the scientific aspect. The other side is the spiritual aspect. The spirit world, that's combining these two, science and spirituality, that's where we have the problem sometimes, because we know what's happening in the spirit world. We talk to them, but then putting it into scientific terms and forms, it gets I don't know, there's a battle sometimes, I think.
I would agree with that completely, and I've mentioned this before, but two of the biggest organizations that we butt heads with, I mean, basically through the concept and philosophy of analytic idealism, we believe we're speaking with consciousness. Science is the first one that we can clash with. Science says that consciousness is created in the body. When the body dies, when the brain dies, consciousness dies, life is over. If that was true, who's answering our questions? Because there is no physical body in front of us. We are not broadcasting our voice out through some transmission for them to pick up. Yet they can answer our questions with timing, relevance, and intelligence. How do you explain that? Then the other one we can bump heads with is religion, and it doesn't matter what religion. But you get people saying, those aren't spirits. You're talking to demons. You're not supposed to do that. So doing something along these lines when you're communicating with what we believe to be consciousness, can ruffle feathers on both sides. And people can get upset with what you're saying, what you're explaining, and how you're explaining it. So that, absolutely.
Yeah, to put a fine point on that also, and just to clarify, so it doesn't sound like we're saying something we're not, through analytic idealism it's a metaphysics, right? And so first of all, the paranormal field often defines metaphysics as being some kind of spiritual woo-woo stuff. It's not. It literally means that which stands behind the physics. the beingness of something. It's an ontology, the study of beingness. It's a philosophical point. So the first thing is that if you have hypotheses and theorems that clash with science, then you've got bad hypotheses and theorems because of the regularities of science and nature that we know are not flawed. The problem with the paranormal clashing with those things is because in the paranormal field, there's a lot of what's called in philosophy spiritual bypassing. Where ghosts just know how to do it. This just happens. Ghosts just do this. They just walk through that. And there's no empirical adequacy to it at all. There's nothing to support it. But we just believe it. These are axioms that get passed down like traditions of like Thanksgiving has a turkey, two mirrors together, bad news, don't do it. There's no support for it. But they get passed down like traditions. And so that's one of the reasons why there's clashing with science. What we see so much in the field now is that we go, this is supernatural. It's beyond natural. It's paranormal. It's beyond the normal. Science can't speak to this. It doesn't know what's going on. This is beyond them. And then the first key witness we call in to prove and make our point that this stuff is real is physics. Yeah. Like, what? You just threw them out of the room. Now you're calling them back in? You can't do that. So we have to look at how we're explaining things and make sure that we're not clashing with science. And do we have the most skeptically parsimonious explanation without creating theoretical entities for the purposes of fleshing out a narrative? And a lot of times we don't. We think, as Tony mentioned, we think that we're communicating with consciousness. And yes, the accepted metaphysics of the world today is what's called physicalism. It used to be called materialism. That suggests that there's a world out there, which we also believe, but that it's standalone. It has physical properties that if you measure or observe, you get those. They reveal them to you when you observe them, but they exist outside of consciousness, and that your brain is what creates consciousness. The problem with that is, and this is like 25 years or so ago back, a gentleman named David Chalmers, a philosopher, came up with, it used to be called, I think, an explanatory gap. Now it's called the hard problem of consciousness, which says that there's nothing about any physical quantity in terms of which we can deduce, at least in principle, the qualities of experience. It's called the hard problem of consciousness. If you have physical matter out there that is outside of consciousness, because your brain creates consciousness, but your brain and all of us are physical matter, right? Atoms, molecules. Then this matter also can't have consciousness, or that matter has to have it because this matter creates it. See the problem? So you have an internal contradiction in your theorem, and it's not, the hard problem is not a problem to be solved. It's meant to say that your ontology or your belief of the origins of what everything is, reality, is flawed, and you maybe need to step back. Another metaphysics was, I guess, at some point forged. It's called panpsychism to try to get around the hard problem that says everything out there is consciousness. Everything's conscious. The table's conscious. The chair's conscious. The person's conscious. The seat's conscious. The shoes are conscious. But then you have problems, so it's called the combination problem. Like if the table's conscious and has consciousness, and then you cut a leg off the table, does that leg have its own consciousness? What if you put it back on the table? Now, how do you fuse and reconcile those two different independent consciousnesses? So it doesn't work, but it's an attempt to get around the hard problem. That's important to us, and the reason we took on analytic idealism as a philosophy, that reality is actually mental in nature, is because when you have that substrate, if that's your ontological primitive consciousness from which everything can be explained, but that itself that cannot be reduced, then you have a foundation for all this stuff we call paranormal, all these experiences to exist without having to try to cram them into physics or something else like that to speak to them, because physics can't measure and calculate everything, right? They can't tell you what's the length of my thoughts.
Yeah.
How much does my love weigh, right? They don't have answers to them, but we know experientially that those things exist. So we look at reality as being mental processes. Analytic idealism says that reality is mental in nature, and what we perceive as the physical world is a representation of the world that's out there. Yeah. And we know from at least 40 so years of quantum mechanics, quantum physics, quantum field theory, that physicality is the result of measurement. That's partly where you get the idea of quantum entanglement from, right? Physicality is the result of measurement. We think the world out there exists solely in exhaustively of quantities. We think the world we live in is made up of 50 yards, 20 feet, 400 kilograms, 8 kilohertz. But those are descriptions of what's out there. Those are not the things themselves, right?
Mhm.
And if we think we live in that world, then that's to say that we're putting the map before the territory. We're taking the map of New Jersey and we're pulling the state out of it. You can't.
Yeah.
The map only has value because it's pointing, it's referential. So you can't have the descriptions come first. And that's one of the problems. Science is in the business of telling us what nature does, what it's going to do, behaviors and patterns of it. It doesn't tell us what reality in nature is. That is a philosophical argument.
But mainstream science will never support anything like this we do with spirituality, because they can't prove that the soul and the human spirit is matter, because they can't trace it and they can't replicate it. That's, so that's never going to, their feelings never going to change, no matter how much what we say as evidence is recorded, even through the strongest control settings, which they do with the soul phone and isolated soundproof booths and things. But until they can prove that this, who I am, exists without me somewhere,
they can't. They'll never prove. First of all, science doesn't prove anything. Math proves. Science leans into what's most probable based on knowing what all the options are and what seems most rational and plausible. All right. I don't know that we even know what all the options are, for one. For two, the soul, right? Or really from its Latin roots is the same word, psyche, soul, the mind. And so we know consciousness exists, right? And so the dichotomy that science tells us we live in is that everything in the world can be jointly and sufficiently explained by either matter or mind stuff. That this is the dichotomy. Those two things can jointly explain everything in reality. But to have a true dichotomy, you have to have two things that are exist on the same level of abstraction, conceptually, right? And you have to be able to tell the ontological state of both of them, like through one question. So if you're testing somebody to see if they're dead or alive, and then the results prove positively that they're alive, you now know the ontological state of death from that one question. You can't do that with mind and matter, because matter only exists through observation. We know that particles don't have standalone existence, right? So if matter exists only through perception and observation, that means consciousness has to come first. Consciousness has primacy. So they don't exist on the same level of abstraction. You have to infer one level further from consciousness to get to that. There's a lot of the reasons why. And then the terms we use to define things is also one of the reasons why science won't acknowledge a soul, because they can't measure it. They can't measure love either, but they don't deny that. They can't measure our thoughts, right? They can't measure any endogenous state, fear. Right. And people go, well, they get brain scans and you see the activity in your brain. So that's measuring love or fear. That's the extrinsic second person appearance of that. That's the image of it. That's not the thing itself. The same way fire is not combustion. It's the extrinsic appearance of combustion.
Yeah. So one quick question, since you guys are talking about using the Staticom project to kind of communicate with the consciousness and moving on. Have you guys done any experiments to prove that it's not your own thoughts or someone else's thoughts in the room coming through?
Go ahead, Tony.
I mean, that the theory states that, well, like you just said, what if it's your own thoughts coming through? Well, every time we do TDSI, which is the Digital Seance Initiative, and we've got 30, 40 people in the audience, how does it determine whose thoughts come through? Or why aren't everybody's thoughts coming through and we just have a mismatch of information flooding through that never happens? I can guarantee you, if thoughts were able to come through the radio every Monday morning, my radio would be screaming, I don't want to do this. I want to go back home. I want to go to bed. That's never happened. So the principle is there. The theory is there that could be happening. But all of our research, when we can get an answer through Staticom, that we have to go look up what word they used because we don't know it. B, when the answer they gave was in no one's thought process at all, and until we evaluated, did we determine that they actually answered the question we asked, but they answered it in a light that none of us were even considering. That, to us, says that's not our thoughts coming through.
Well, like Ron, I don't know if you remember 100 years ago, in the ITC collaboration group, I did that code word experiment where
Right.
I randomly drew a word out of a hat, put it in an envelope, set it aside, and then did the live stream of just the envelope and had people do spirit box sessions to try to get the word. And I forgot what the word was now. Several people got it through their spirit boxes. So
Right. No, there's something to it. Again, we think that that's relationally explained more parsimoniously and without inventing theoretical entities. If you look at what we're communicating with being consciousness, right?
Yeah.
And first of all, Tony very nicely laid out the idea of where the problems are, the plethora of problems with the whole our minds are coming through the processing. I think that's another thing that's kind of the byproduct of epistemic dependency, where we were taught that that's possible. And now, through some culturally manufactured plausibility, we think it's possible. I don't know that that's ever happened. The other thing to speak to what you're talking about, when we do that, sometimes we'll be at an event. We've written a word down on a piece of paper, folded it, put it in the room. I've held up my glasses. There were 3 police officers in the room at this event. I held up my glasses. What's in my hand? And a voice comes through Staticom and says glasses. We've talked about this before, and there was someone in the audience on the podcast one time and said, well, spirits can see and hear just like we can, even though they don't have eyes and ears. And then, well, that's fascinating, because you also believe that we are spirits, but we're having a human experience. And through analytic idealism, there's one mind. It's very much like multiple personality, where you have one mind that presents itself as multiple centers of identity. So they're all part of it, but they feel separate and they work exclusively of each other, but they are still of one mind, right? So I said, well, that's interesting, because for billions of years of evolution, we've developed these ocular and auditory systems for the purposes of survival. And who knew we never needed them, because spirits can see and hear without eyes and ears. Would we have not eradicated blindness and deafness if that were true?
Yeah.
Again, I think this is a line of spiritual bypassing that has absolutely no empirical adequacy. However, if you look under analytic idealism, and the idea that reality in nature is consciousness, is mental, and we are all fractal parts of it, but dissociated, then when we ask for information like that, it's part of the collective, because we, or somebody who is embodied like we are, is contributed that information to consciousness, to the universal phenomenal consciousness of which we're a part. And I think that is how they're grokking that information, is because somebody is inputting that. And this is similar to explain for near death, when people are observing things when they're out of their body, and they're observing things in the surgery room that they don't have eyes and ears to do, because that's on the body that they're looking down at. But if they're able to, through consciousness, see that, because that information is being input by the doctors, the nurses, and other people who are in there, then that's accessed information. And you have to think that that's possible if you believe in the survival theory that consciousness continues after physical death. That information and those experiences have to go somewhere if consciousness, which is experiential, does.
All right, we went down so many rabbit holes for the past hour. Explain Staticom, what it is, the setup. I've seen your setup, but no, some people here may not. So just explain it an hour later from when we started. But
no, it's good, because I think, and I want Tony to take the lead on explaining it, because he does a really fantastic job of doing that. But it was important, I think, that we got to the other stuff, because the one reason we adopted the philosophy is because we get hit with this a lot. You don't think that stuff's real. You don't think ghosts are real. You think that's real. And how many people in the field take the extra step back to look at what they actually think reality is? You don't have a metaphysics that you're aware of. You're most likely operating under materialism, which doesn't allow for this stuff. And then you have the argument with science that you keep losing, because you're throwing them out of the room and then calling them back in as a witness at the same time. So we think that's important to the field as a substrate for all of the information and all the data that we're collecting, and why it has validity. Now, Staticom with your host, Tony Rathman.
Staticom, everyone always says, well, what kind of device is this? Well, it's not a device, it's a method. And we call it a method because it's literally a Frankenstein monster of components, of filters, of just the definition of Frankenstein. I mean, he's got pieces from all over the place, and that's what it is. But the difference between like direct radio voice or a spirit box is that, as we explained before, the radio is gone. We can receive no transmission, not from radio, not from walkie-talkies, not from baby monitors, not from satellites, nothing. None of that. All of that's still floating around, but none of it can be impacted by the Staticom system. Staticom uses a white noise generator only. That is our source of input. That source gets input into the computer. The computer then filters that white noise, takes out, amplifies, cleans up. But the two biggest ones are that it slows down live white noise in real time. Through tests, we realized Ron had a really good example, which he believed was mother. He thought he only heard the word on, and it was like 3 full sentences. And when that happened, we said, wait a minute, something's going on here. We've got to fix this so that we don't miss communication. So Ron came to me and said, how do we slow down live white noise? Excuse me. Luckily, I did find an option. We still use it today. And every time Staticom runs, that live white noise is slowed down 50%. So we don't miss communication that's coming through. The other thing we did was in like EVP, the record and review, you take a recorder to a place, you ask question after question after question.
Yeah.
Then what do? You stop it, you take it home, then you review it. Any communication is already done. Then you go through, you try to clean it up, you try to take out background noise, you try to amplify it, you try to get that voice. All of that in Staticom is done in real time at the moment of contact. So the voice, when the response comes in, we can hear it, distortion is gone, the white noise is cut out from underneath. When a spirit speaks at a certain hertz or kilohertz, it overlaps the white noise, that gets elevated, pushes the voice up, kind of like a single bee flying a foot from your head or the whole hive. That's the elevation, the stochastic resonance elevation. Then we cut the white noise off. So we only have the voice responding. That all happens in a two-way communication. So then we'll hear their answer. We can respond again with another question or another statement, and then their answer comes through. And it is literally two-way communication.
Yep.
So that's the Staticom project.
What's your source for your white noise?
White noise generator.
How did you choose one?
Well, they're not cheap and they're hard to find.
Yeah.
Plus, we were going through the whole COVID electronics problem.
Yeah.
So we chose one that was portable. 2 was producing live white noise. That's super important so that you're not.
It's not recorded white noise.
Correct. So those were the 2 main priorities. But we've been using the same ones, I think, since we turned it over to Staticom, and that was 2 years ago. Right. So it's still working today, and it's working really well.
Yep.
So all that's going into your computer, and like a program's doing all the work is what's happening. Am I saying that right? Like white noise is going into the computer and it's slowing it down, and is that how it's working?
Yeah, white noise is all that goes in. It is the one component. It is the only component.
Okay.
From that component, the voices come out. So the only in-between step is what the actual computer does. Because Ron pulled voices from a 1980s world band radio on a vacant station without any computer.
Yeah.
All the computer does is filtration. It cleans it up, cuts the white noise out, adjusts some frequencies, and slows down live white noise. That is all the computer
Is that
does.
an audio program, like one audio program, or is this stuff you put together? Because all I can do is I can do a PowerPoint, and I'm thrilled. Computers.
It's a Frankenstein monster, like Tony described before. It's a bunch of different components that are primarily designed for music production.
Okay. Okay.
that we tried in all different configurations. We spent a lot of time. This is 5-6 years in the making, rearranging them, tweaking settings.
Sure. Yeah.
And we've got it to a point now where we hear almost no noise floor. So the resonance takes place, and by the time you hear a vocal, the noise floor has been filtered out, but anything that jumped up in amplitude remains. So you'll hear just silence, or sometimes you hear little blips, but for the most part, it's quiet.
Right.
And then you'll hear what sounds like a voice. You'll hear words. You'll hear a phrase. You hear a few phrases. And that's part of what we wanted to do, was make it more and more undeniable that it's phrases and words and communication coming through. I think it's more absurd to lean into the whole warbles thing at the level of what's coming through.
Yeah.
If we're mishearing warbles and artifacts to the degree that we're hearing words, and other people in rooms full of people are hearing words and breaking into applause, then God help us, because we all have some big cultural hearing problem going on that seems to only affect the spooky stuff.
I just, I'm going to ask a question that a lot of people may not understand, but have you discovered a team on the other side, your ITC team?
I know that the soul phone people have identified specific people. We don't. We've gotten names before of some. We've gotten Bocce a lot. We've gotten Rodave. We've gotten the names a lot.
Possibly Edison.
Yeah, we've gotten the names a lot. We won't go. At least I won't go to the degree of identifying and saying I know that's who it is. I also think if we're communicating with a universal phenomenal consciousness, that the one thing you lose when you physically pass on is personal agency. So your experiences and everything you are continues, and those are part of one mind, but it's not individual, substrate independent consciousnesses floating around, because that doesn't have any foundational support. We have no reason to believe that that's possible. Yeah. You could theorize anything. You could believe anything based on the same facts and not support it. Or you could look at what do we know from science, from paranormal research, that there is empirical evidence for, and can that explain it? Instead of inventing things or going to, what's imaginative to try to fill in the narrative. I think that's, for us procedurally, that's important. So we don't say that we know for sure that this is a team or we have these people, but we've gotten some stuff that leans that way. I'll say that. Yeah. Tony may have a slightly different opinion on that, but I think we're pretty much in the same arena.
I agree with everything Ron said.
Have you done any really thought-provoking questions? Like one time I did all these questions like, what happens to murderers when they get to the spirit world? Are they punished? Was Hitler punished when he got into the spirit world? Those kind of, have you asked any? Because sometimes they will just say they can't answer it. They won't answer it.
Yeah.
The problem with the number of questions that are available to be asked.
I know.
People always ask us, how are the pyramids built? Does Atlantis exist?
Who killed
You have hundreds of millions of questions. And you could literally spend your life and not get through half of them, or less than half of them. So the problem is to focus energy on that when we're still refining, doing the research of what we believe is working, how we believe it's working, making sure that we attend to any influxes in the machinery to make it better, make it clearer, make it anything. Those are always the top priorities, and to look for flaws in what we consider to be happening today, because we have a very good philosophy on how we believe it's occurring, but again, like Ron said, are we 100%? That's what's occurring? No, we always have to keep our eyes open in case something occurs that doesn't match or line up with what we're saying. So there are hundreds of millions of questions to ask, and do we have the time and the availability to ask them all? Unfortunately, no, we don't. Have we asked questions like that, though? Absolutely. And I heard you say something about, do they answer? We know that on certain questions, they will not answer.
Absolutely.
And this brings me back to the comment that when Ron was explaining about sight and the, if spirits could see, why would we go through? And I agree with him on that. But the one aspect is because I know that I will ask a question and I can tell you questions I know I won't get an answer to. But the one thing, Ron, that I can maybe throw out there is the reason why, even if a spirit could see, why we develop is because, and I've said this before, that the human body is part of the veil between the living and the dead. And if we could see the way spirits would see, it would put you into that entropic soup of you'd be seeing everything as it is.
Yeah.
So that, I'm not going to go down that road right now. We can talk about that later. But to your question, Philip, about hitting that wall, yes, there are questions that I know they won't answer. And again, this is just my personal theory, but is that each one of us as a broken off piece of the universal mind is here to learn, to grow our individual consciousness while we're here and supply that information back to universal consciousness. If I was able to get information from the universal consciousness that would change that path or upset whatever I'm here to learn, then the whole process falls apart. And so that's why I think we are limited to what we can know, why we're going through this, and why then we know all of it when we join back to the universal consciousness. But sorry, Ron, it just made me think about maybe the one reason why we are limited to our sight, to our hearing, and that maybe that spirits might be able to see as spirits, but why they're not be able to use that here, because you'd see everything. You would see, and that would maybe destroy the reasoning for the learning process here and now.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
if they answered those questions, it could change our soul's journey here.
Correct.
Right. So, I mean, as far as, again, and I cautioned on this in the beginning that I'm very picky with the words that we use. So sight is in fact synonymous or akin to visual acuity, right? What we use our eyes to see. If universal consciousness is one mind and we are dissociative states of it, then that one mind would not need to see in the same sense that we see, because everything would be endogenous perception. It would be all internal from within mind. The same way if you were in a room blindfolded with no taste, smell, touch, everything, you were just isolated and all your senses were not pulling in information, you could still develop a passion for somebody, or you could still have a dream, or you could still feel endogenous states from inside. So I think the thing to keep in mind from an idealism perspective is the one mind. And I think nature, in reality, you have to have a reduction base, right? When you try to explain the world, you can explain organs in form of cells in forms of subatomic particles, etc. You can go all the way down. At some point, you have to stop reducing, or you're chasing your tail. So you have what's called a reduction base. For us, that's consciousness. That is mentation, is the reduction base. So if there is nothing larger than mind at large, if universal consciousness is the ontological primitive from which everything comes but can't be reduced,
right,
then it doesn't have the ability to metacognize, which is to not only experience, but to know that one experiences. We have that.
I agree with that.
So nature's learning about itself through us.
Right.
It doesn't have the ability to introspect and re-represent something to itself in a metacognitive way. That's where we come in.
I agree with all that. We can discuss the. Okay,
I don't agree with any of that.
One, so we'll save the sight thing for another time.
When you're starting a session, do you have any rituals like, "Hi, this is Ron and Tony. We come to you with love. We want to communicate with the spirit world, blah, blah, blah. We want to show that there is life after death. Please help you. But, you give a spiel to the spirit world to invite them in any way, or you just turn it on and like see what happens?
Well, I mean, I'll give my perspective first, but after 14 and a half years of doing this, it's really no longer necessary. The connections over the years have been made. They know what we're doing. They know why we're turning it on. They know we're going to want to communicate, and they're there each and every time we flip it on. So, does it hurt somebody to go through any type of ritual if they want to, if that makes them feel better about what they're doing or makes them feel like they're going to connect better? No, nothing wrong with it at all. But do myself or Cherie personally do that before we do a Staticom session anymore? No, we don't.
But see, you just answered my question about the spirituality part of ITC is having that connection with the spirit world already.
Correct. Correct.
So they know you. It's like even like when I can turn it on and they say, "Hey, Philip, hi, Philip." It just happens. And it, something I have to do at private home investigations, if we do ITC, is say we only want to speak to any entity in this home. Any of my friends in the spirit world can hear me. Please step back. We're here for a job. And I usually say, if you understand, can you say my code word? And which is pickle, everybody knows. And then they'll say it. But because they love to talk. But sometimes you're working. You don't have time for chit chat with, your friends over there. I know people think that's crazy, but. And no, we do not present ITC to clients as evidence. We present it as experimental and subjective if they want to hear it. But we do use it because it helps us with information a lot of times.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think one of the things we say a lot is that we think, honestly, the worst thing to happen to spirituality is the word spirituality. Because it gives it a distinction, a class distinction that puts it outside of reality for a lot of people. And I don't think that it is. And I was reading what, by the way, Linda Judd has had some amazing comments and questions. But as she mentioned, the concept out there that Earth has consciousness. For the Earth to have consciousness would be to say that inanimate abstract matter would have consciousness, and then you run into what's called the combination problem. The Earth is one word, right, that we label for the planet, but there's several components that exist
air
on the Earth, right? And that's the danger that language gives us, because we have to use nouns and certain words to refer to things for the purposes of conversation. And sometimes it paints us into a corner. Like when we speak, a lot of times we'll say, well, "What is this?" It's a fist. Where did it go? It was never a thing. It was a doing. That's a behavior of the field of subjectivity. It's not a thing with standalone existence, but we give it a name. So the Earth would be within consciousness. And that kind of brings me back, and only because I don't want to forget my thought, to the seeing and hearing thing. If consciousness is universal, if there's nothing beyond universal consciousness, then anything within it would be thoughts within consciousness. And we don't have to see our thoughts. We experience them endogenously. We don't have to have sight to see our thoughts. So universal consciousness would not need, or anything within universal consciousness that's not fractally dissociated like we are, wouldn't need to have sight in the way that we have sight, because it wouldn't be necessary. It would be within the context of mind. So for us, we have those senses because we have a whole world out there. And when Tony refers to entropic soup, entropy is the dissociation or the chaos, the breaking down of an organized system. And there's no upper bounds that we're aware of to the structural integrity of the entire world out there. But our cellular structure and dynamic does have upper bounds. And if we took in everything in information-wise that was possible to take in from the outside world, that would be where we would just literally just melt. And there's your entropic soup. Through entropy, we would just fall apart. So we have senses that give us limited information. We know we can't see everything that's in light spectrum. We can't hear everything in sound. That's to give us enough salient things to navigate the world. And occasionally something modulates something, and boom, we see a spirit or we hear a voice that we shouldn't hear, or our method, like Staticom, brings a voice into where our dashboard of dials that tells us what's going on out there, and then we hear it and experience it. And we do that subjectively, but we do it through something modulating the experience.
And you talk about the collective consciousness that, once our consciousness leaves our bodies, our soul, spirit, whatever you want to call it, it all goes into like one big clump. That we all are part of the universe with our collective consciousness. When a medium gets a message from an individual, their singular identity comes through. So I believe part of a person's consciousness and soul, breaks off into many different pieces. But when a medium gets a message, it's from a specific individual, because they give me information that's specific to that person that only this person's going to understand. So that's an individual consciousness that's coming.
Well, it's the appearance of an individual consciousness or an individuated experience. But it could still be the same way you have compartmentalized things, that you have memories of different stages of your life. And your name could have been Bob. You would still identify as who you are, and those experiences wouldn't change if your name was something different, right? So it still doesn't necessarily, like, you could connect everything. You could say, all right, I have a car. I want to have a car, and we know a car is distinct from the rest of the world because of how we define it, right? Which is essentially arbitrary. A car has to have an engine. You have to have combustion so the car goes, but you also have to have tires so the car can go. So the tires are also part of the car. In order for the tires to grip the road, there has to be a road. So now the road is also part of the car. And then for the tires to grip the road, you have to have gravity to pull the car to the ground. So now gravity and the road are also part of the car. And the road is part of the earth. So now the earth is also part of it. See what I'm saying? We draw arbitrary boundaries for separating things for the purposes of referring to them. But you can get individuated memories or experiences that come from consciousness. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's substrate independent, where that consciousness is floating around outside of universal consciousness. It's still within it, but it's an individuated part of it that was at one point, if it was human like us, dissociated and embodied.
But you can still get the answers you're saying that appear to be coming from that individual consciousness. It's just the universal consciousness sorting through that soup bowl of information and giving it back.
Rathman for the score.
It's fascinating.
And again, we're not saying that we're right and we know. When I added to that in the way I answered that question, if we're trying to have internal consistency with regard to what we believe and how we explain our stuff. And there's a lot of in the field, like I said, people throw science out and then they pull it back in to explain stuff. The ideas behind stone tape theory and psychometry. Do I think those things happen? Yes. Do I think the way that they've been explained, wood soaking up experiential states and emotions, when wood outside of consciousness supposedly doesn't have those things? No. So there has to be another way that happens, and through mentation or mental processes, it can. So I think that these things that we experience all do happen. We're just trying to be consistent in how we apply reasoning to explaining them.
The other thing that stands out to me in support of the individual consciousness while we're human, then returning to universal consciousness, is if you weren't human for, say, 500 years, and all the information which we say collected by an individual consciousness returns to universal consciousness, if that didn't happen, you'd have spirits that were stuck in the 1500s. And when does that ever happen? When do you ever get language from the 1500s in an EVP? No, they're using current language, regardless of when they've come from. So the theory to me then supports the fact that they have access. We played one just a few weeks ago that said the word, it was from a house we were in from 1820, and it said the word cops. And they wanted to know if cops, that word even existed. Then there was another one about the word cancer. Did that word exist then? Well, in this theory of information being passed directly back, now it's a one-way street as long as we're still here, until we rejoin universal consciousness, but that's enough to then let every other disassociated consciousness, when they disassociate again, or while they're there, to have full information of everything. Otherwise, you'd have people, if you believed in reincarnation, you'd have people that were born lacking 500 years of information and progress.
Yeah, that's perfect. And one of the things that could confuse this, and we're still formulating how we explain it so that we don't confuse ourselves or other people, is, and I'm guilty of this also. We'll refer to the different spirits or individuated experiences with interactions, and we'll use words like they, which has a pluralization to it. But if we're talking about one mind, it's not a they, and all the information goes to, when we reassimilate, to that one consciousness that is not reducible, from which we all come.
It's no longer a they.
Right. Once we assimilate back into universal consciousness. So it's how we explain it and how we look at it. Again, we try to stay consistent, but that's part of the problem, is that language sometimes makes it difficult, and it inhibits how we can refer to things. And we think sometimes, because if something has physical parameters that we're aware of, that it exists outside of consciousness. But
and Ron was super supportive of that whole concept, even from when we first joined years ago. We were talking about, different methods and different. He's like, "No, that's not the right word." And I'm like, "What do you mean it's not the right word?" But then he explained why, and how the wrong choice of words for what you're describing can create that additional confusion. So we worked very hard to avoid that with what we talked about.
To me, there's two basic reasons for ITC and spirit communication. One being healing for the people left behind when the individual person comes, say, through ITC or medium, and also to give evidence that the continuation of life after bodily death. Those are the two basic reasons for spirit communication. But I want people to realize this. It's not for paranormal investigating. There's real reasons for this stuff.
Yeah, sorry, Ron, go ahead.
No, that's all right. You go first. I was just going to say it was
that's an excellent point, and this is a super important part as well. But gaining that information, seeing what you can be taught that you didn't know, or have them tell you, huge part of ITC. But you're right. The second part is to bring some sort of emotional closure to people who have lost children or parents or whomever the case may be. But that portion of it, for us running Staticom to the public and in groups, and PDSI sessions, is probably what I would consider, and I'm sure the team all agrees with this, to be one of the most satisfactory pieces of anything that could come from Staticom, is when somebody goes, "Oh my gosh, that was my son," or that was my mother. I heard them. I recognize the voice. That I can't thank you guys enough. That was changed my whole emotional state. You cannot take that any other way than just being grateful and thankful that they got that opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that always comes from them. Like, that's not
right.
We cannot lead or deceive them down that path, because we don't know who's going to be at the sessions and what information
right.
be able to pull or be able to refer to. But when they have those experiences, it is totally fulfilling. And not to be taken lightly or dismissed. I think, first of all, the transcendent aspect of that is huge for people. Right. That is what's missing, I think, with the lack of religion. A lot of people, I think, institutions ruin religion, but religion itself has a lot of value. We have a transcendent need. That's why we get so passionately involved in sports, politics. We end up in the arms of a stranger. We look to the bottom of a bottle. These things are trying to connect with something larger than ourselves.
Yeah,
it's a cultural issue. So if we give those moments to people, it is, like Tony said, it is extremely rewarding. It's what Marcello Bacci did. We did not
just
intend.
to say that. Yeah.
We did not intend to be on that path when we started. We were just trying to see if we
Right.
could do what they did.
Yeah.
But now we're doing what they did on the path that they did it, and it's fantastically rewarding. Like Tony said, it absolutely is. And if they have that experience, that's their subjective experience. And to dismiss it and say that it's hallucinatory or it's some kind of illusion, still that statement denies
healing from it.
That statement denies the point it tries to make. When somebody says that this experience you had was a hallucination or was a delusion, so it's not real, it denies the statement it's trying to make, because what is a hallucination? It's a conscious experience.
Right.
When somebody has a mental irregularity, they have reality that they experience as reality. Right?
Well, crisis apparitions, I mean, how comforting that could be when somebody's passing, they come to say goodbye. You're going to take that away from somebody by telling them that's all in their head? No.
Yeah. So we believe that. We believe when people have these experiences, when they see things, when they hear things, are there some people who lack the integrity and who may be making it up? Are there YouTube channels that have the word demon every other video? Yeah. Do I think there's something wrong with that? Yeah, I do.
Absolutely.
I vehemently oppose. I reject that outright. I think it's.
But that their goals are different than our goals. Their goals are likes and views.
Right.
Ours is making a connection. It's totally different.
Right. But
their reward is very shallow and fleeting. Where this is
in the court of public opinion, that stuff gets conflated with what we do.
Yeah.
Right. And that's
unfortunately.
And that's sad. That's sad that you think that the Vatican and the Catholic Church has this rigorous process through which they vet the authenticity of the possibility of demonic interference or demonic infestation, oppression, or whatever, right? So you could go that route with all the red tape, or you could just call your friendly neighborhood YouTuber who can get you clicks and follows and get rid of the demon, but don't watch the video alone. I can't. You have to have. It's completely a culturally manufactured plausibility that somehow, I don't know how it takes root, but the community buys into it, and the people outside the community buy into it. I don't get it. I will openly oppose that always, because I think it's not. It's just completely unfounded. It is internally inconsistent, and it's completely empirically inadequate. There's nothing. It's completely, it's all bypassing. How do you? There's a demon over there coming out of the portal under the stairs. Yeah. You're into flying spaghetti monster territory, right? Right? There's you could say that the planets and everything move around the stars and they're in their gravitational pulls, and not because of anything to do with science or what science says. It could purely be because there's this big spaghetti monster who moves them around with his noodly tentacles. You could explain it that way, but there's no reason to believe that. But there's a lot of spaghetti monster explanation behind what's in the field, and I think we need to stop doing that, or we're not going to ever get taken seriously.
Yep. Well, we do have two quick questions that I want to get answered before we close out for the night. But Linda had two questions earlier. One is, what kind of opinions are you guys getting from the other side about your work?
I would say it's positive. I mean, I remember when we first started and them going, wait, you can hear us? You can hear us? I mean, those were some of the first responses we heard, because they weren't used to that. Not when we're talking a word or two, but when we're talking, we can hear them communicate with each other.
Yes.
And we can repeat back to them what we heard. And they're like, wait, you heard that? You can hear us? But now it's more of a excitement level. When we turn it on and we communicate with them and we ask questions, it seems to be, so far anyway, very positive in that opinion, where they're happy to participate. We've never turned it on and not had them communicate. So in reference to that question, all of those specific points point to me that it's well taken and received positively.
They're working as hard over there to talk to us as we are here trying to talk to them. But we're all working.
Yep. And then the other question was, can you do closed caption on Staticom?
It's been done before. We've done Facebook Lives before when people had closed caption running. It will surprisingly get a lot of it accurate. It will sometimes miss things. It won't get everything. I think when it's automated or even AI driven captioning, a lot of times it can misconstrue or get something wrong. But there is a decent accuracy rate to when it's been used. It has captured a lot. Or at least logged a lot of what seemed to be coming through.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation as always. I love listening to different theories and different ways of approaching research in this field because as most of you guys know, I'm all about the scientific aspect of it. I want to know the scientific answers, and sadly, it probably won't happen in my lifetime. But I want to see this field be a true science. And not just I can't stand the word pseudoscience, but that's just me.
Well, it's not. Honestly,
it's not a pseudoscience.
Exactly.
If you're talking about parapsychology or it's not a pseudoscience, that's a social science. They look at people and how they were affected and what was caused and what those causes made their next behavior and reactions to be. So the word pseudoscience, when you're talking about parapsychology, just doesn't even fit because that's a social science, not a pseudoscience.
Yeah. I have so many people telling me, why do you do what you do? That's a pseudoscience. You're wasting your time.
Yeah, I have
language.
My fifth book is almost done, and I have a chapter in it that's called "It's Never Going to Be a Science or a Pseudoscience," because according to what science says, it's things that it doesn't speak to. It doesn't. Science doesn't speak to. I forget what it was, like certain abstract things, things that are not reliable. Like there's a few different things, I forget how it defines, but per definition, it doesn't qualify. And then if you look at the aspects of it, that these are experiential things we're having, and that's why, to circle back, the consciousness element of having an ontology, having a metaphysics that makes sense, it doesn't clash with what science can tell us, but allows for the reality to be what we experience. That's why that's so important to us, because we know that these things happen. Everything that we know, directly or indirectly, is through experience. It's hot, it's cold, it's big, it's small, it tastes good, it tastes bad. Those are all experiential states. Science can't measure any of those things. And when they say that there's brain activity and that's measuring or that's consciousness, it's not. It's the extrinsic appearance of it from a second person perspective. But the inner phenomenal conscious life that's experiencing that is not the same thing as the outside view or what the instrumentation will display as a neural correlate of consciousness, something that happens at the same time that correlates, but is not necessarily causal in its relationship to what's going on. So I don't think personally, based on how science is defined, it'll ever be a science. And then by virtue of that, it can't ever be a pseudoscience, because a pseudoscience is something that it doesn't have the predicate things necessary to be a science, but trying to be a science.
Yeah,
I like that description.
Scientific.
We stop trying to be a science, and we just start being an area of study, and we actually take a look at what our metaphysics is. What do we believe that reality fundamentally consists of? It's either physical, outside of consciousness, or it's all within consciousness, or everything out there is consciousness, like panpsychism. But I think step one is to start from an ontology, a philosophical perspective. What do you think reality consists of? And then go from there. Science informs philosophy. Philosophy informs science. They do not speak to the same stuff. And one of the things science doesn't speak to is what nature or reality is. And that's why philosophy or metaphysics is so important, at least to us.
Yep.
Agreed.
Okay. So great conversation tonight. Always great to have you guys on. Look forward to having you guys on the future to learn more about your future progress with this project. So, but until then, can you let everybody know how they can find you if they want to learn more information about the project?
Sure. There's two individual websites, Gonyac, which is GONYAC, paranormal.com. There's also entityvoices.com. You can find us on YouTube. If you go to YouTube, just type in Staticom. I think we have coming up close to 200, I think 176 videos, all Staticom captures. You can spend probably a couple of days going through listening to all of those. We're on Facebook, most of the social media channels. The Facebook pages are obviously individual: Tony Rappin, Ron Yacovetti, Lourdes Gonzalez, Cherie Rappin. But if you hit any of those, you will find information on this. You'll find updates. You'll find out where maybe we're speaking next, where we're presenting next. Just information that may not have come out in various podcasts. So yeah, check those out.
Perfect.
Yep. Perfectly said. Thank you for having us. Both of you you both, we have a ton of love and respect for you guys. Thanks for having me on again. Thanks for having Tony and I on together. And thank you to your audience. Folks like Linda, who had a ton of good questions and comments. And so we appreciate, you should. We appreciate the opportunity to let us be here.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Anything before we close out, Philip?
No, just everybody out there send my team good energy for Saturday night while we try to help this family figure out what's going on in their house.
Yep. Lots of good juju going your guys' way.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, again, thank you guys for joining us, and thank you everybody for watching. You can always follow us on Facebook at Ghost Education 101, where you can watch the replay, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Ghost Education 101 as well. We have all of our videos from the very beginning, including our first videos that we had. Oh, geez, how many years ago is it now?
I think I was like 12 or 13 when we started.
Yep. several years ago. It seems like it's
2020.
Absolutely. What?
We started in 2020, believe it or not.
Yes. Holy cow. Yeah. 4 years. Wow. And about this time too, I think, is when we started. So we're coming up on that exact anniversary, if we haven't passed it. But all of the videos are there. I made sure I've uploaded them all so you can catch all of them. And then if you are in the Atlanta area or want to download the app for WGJY 99.1 FM, and we are on Monday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern. Philip has done a great job editing clips from our past shows to put them in our segments, so you can catch those shows there. And then
love
this
our
one
intro song. Everyone listen and tell me how wonderful it is. Also, we're on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon, something else. I don't know. All those podcasty things.
Yeah, and bear with me, everybody. I will get our Facebook page updated soon with all of those links on there. I'm a little bit behind with my to-do list. But this one I'm looking forward to. We will have a special guest host in 2 weeks who is going to put Philip and I in the hot seat and do an Ask Us Anything show where they will interview us and you guys can ask us any questions that you have about our experiences, our theories, our beliefs. We're basically an open book. So
we are. I mean, we are.
You have the right to remain silent if it's going to incriminate you for anything, though. I can tell you that. But again, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. You all have a great night. See you in 2 weeks.
Good night.